Now, when it comes to Drake and Kendrick Lamar, things are getting even more intense than anyone expected. Drake has just dropped 3 albums only a month ago, basically flooding the entire space with more music than most artists would dare to release in a full year. Yet somehow, this still doesn't feel like the end of it. And here's the real shocker, you won't believe this, but there's now strong confirmation that Drake already has at least one, possibly even multiple new projects lined up for release this year. At the same time, the timing feels way too suspicious to ignore, because Kendrick Lamar is heavily rumored to be gearing up for a return of his own, and new clues around that situation are starting to stack up fast. But before we go deeper into all the good, the bad, and the chaos behind it, make sure to like and subscribe, because this whole situation is getting messy, and you'll want to stay updated as it unfolds. And honestly, whether you think Kendrick is better than Drake or Drake is better than Kendrick, drop your take too, because this debate is only fueling the fire even more. Now back to Drake, because what's happening behind the scenes is even more aggressive than what we're seeing publicly. He's reportedly locked in the studio, pushing out new material, almost as if he's trying to outpace the entire industry in real time. And it raises one big question: why now? Especially right after releasing so much music. And that's where things get even more interesting. I know what you're thinking. Why would Drake overload the market like this again so soon? His latest rollout, including Iceman, is still holding chart positions and making noise, but the strategy behind it feels deeper than just music drops. Some see it as pure obsession with numbers. Others see it as a calculated response to competition at the very top. Because let's be real, this isn't just about releasing songs anymore. It's about chasing dominance, especially in comparison to Kendrick Lamar, who still sits at the top in key metrics that matter in the industry conversation. And even after hitting milestones like 100 million monthly listeners on Spotify, something only a few artists have ever done, Drake didn't even stay there for long before dropping back down again, showing just how unstable that peak really is. And now, with all of this happening at once, the reality is starting to set in. Drake may need even more output just to stay in the conversation at the level he wants. But the bigger twist here is that this is all unfolding while label tensions and internal industry pressure are still floating in the background, making the whole situation feel even more unpredictable. And even though Drake is clearly riding a massive wave of hype right now, there's a darker layer behind all of it that people are starting to point out. You won't believe this, but the conversation isn't just about music anymore. It's about control, contracts, and the pressure building inside the industry itself. From the legal tension, the lawsuit talk, and everything that's been said around the beef, it all circles back to one major question about how much influence his label has actually had over his direction. Because when you look at it right now, those recent albums still dropped with full backing from UMG, and everybody involved still got paid. In other words, the machine is still running exactly as it always has, and Drake remains one of its biggest fuel sources under the same deal structure he's been operating in. But here's where things start to shift. If the rumor is even half true, that Drake might currently be a free agent or operating without a fully locked-in new deal, then his next project suddenly becomes way more than just music. It turns into leverage, almost like a test run to see how powerful he really is, without the full weight of a label behind him. And from what's being reported, he's already acting like someone preparing for that exact scenario. Right now, he's in Turks and Caicos shooting visuals, pushing content tied to current records like Maid of Honor, while also quietly stacking new material in the background. And that contrast alone is raising eyebrows across the industry. At the same time, there's a clear expectation that whatever comes next is not going to be another experimental shift like Honestly, Nevermind. This feels different, more calculated, more direct. And what's being teased points towards something much heavier, possibly a return to pure lyrical pressure, the kind of energy associated with Scary Hours 4. You won't believe this, but insiders are already acting like this project is basically locked in for the next wave, even if nothing official has been fully confirmed yet. And according to multiple sources with a track record of predicting major drops, the idea of Scary Hours 4 plus additional Drake releases this year is already being discussed behind the scenes. And that's where the bigger picture starts to form. Because if those leaks and insider claims are accurate, this isn't just about one project, it's about a cycle, a constant output strategy where music never really pauses long enough to settle. Instead, it just keeps coming, faster and faster, keeping the audience reacting instead of reflecting. Some people call it dominance, others call it overload, but either way, it's clear the pace is intentional. And with more voices in the industry backing up similar claims, some even referencing early access to things like Iceman content before release, it starts to feel like this isn't speculation anymore, but a pattern that's already in motion. If all of this is true, then it means something bigger is already in motion behind the scenes, something that Drake and his team aren't just casually hinting at, but actively positioning in front of the entire industry. You won't believe this, but when multiple sources start aligning on the idea of a new Drake rollout, it usually isn't random noise anymore. It becomes strategy. And if labels, insiders, and collaborators are all talking, then clearly information is being placed out there for a reason, even if the full picture hasn't been revealed yet. Now, when it comes to Scary Hours 4, the conversation gets even intense. Because the way it's being described, this isn't just another drop. It's being framed as a moment where Drake finally spins the block and responds directly to everything surrounding him. That includes industry pressure, label tension, and of course the ongoing narrative battles tied to figures like Kendrick Lamar and even Jay-Z. And if that's really the direction, then this project isn't just music. It becomes a statement piece built on retaliation, pride, and reputation. But here's the catch. When an artist tries to turn an entire project into a response to everyone at once, it either becomes legendary or completely chaotic. And that's where things get messy, because reports are now pointing toward Drake actively reaching out across the West Coast, trying to connect with artists and producers to shape new records in real time. One of the most talked about situations involves Lefty, a Grammy-winning West Coast artist who was part of Kendrick Lamar's TV Off wave. According to what's been said, Drake allegedly tried to collaborate with him, and even after being turned down, the attempt didn't stop there. It reportedly continued, twice, and you won't believe how much that detail has fueled speculation about what Drake is actually building right now. Because if these interactions are real, then it suggests a pattern that goes beyond just making music. It suggests targeting specific voices, moments, and cultural symbols tied to recent West Coast momentum. And when you connect that with songs like Too Hard for the Radio, it starts to look like Drake is intentionally trying to recreate that same impact on a larger scale, a calculated attempt to reinsert himself into spaces where the narrative has shifted away from him. But here's the interesting part. Despite all of that pressure and outreach, not every move is landing. In fact, some of these collaborations reportedly didn't go through at all, with artists like Lefty choosing not to engage in what they see as clout-driven positioning. And that resistance matters because it shows that not every part of the industry is aligning with the momentum Drake is trying to build. Instead, it creates a split narrative, one side pushing for dominance through output and visibility, and the other side refusing to get pulled into that cycle at all. And that tension is exactly what makes this era feel unpredictable. Because at this point, it's no longer just about who drops music, it's about who controls the story around it. So now we're at a point where everything around Drake feels like it's building towards something much bigger than just another release. And you won't believe this, but if this pattern of reaching out, collaborating, and trying to control the narrative is really what's happening, then it raises a serious question about what Scary Hours 4 or his next project is actually supposed to represent. Because at this point, it doesn't just look like music, it looks like a strategy built around response, pressure, and positioning against multiple fronts in the industry. And that's where things get even more layered. If this is truly the direction, then Drake isn't just aiming at one person or one moment. He's potentially expanding the target. You're talking about Kendrick Lamar, Jay-Z, maybe even artists like A$AP Rocky or others tied into different regional lanes. You won't believe this, but the way this is being framed almost makes it sound like a rotating cycle of collaborations, confrontations, and industry statements all wrapped into one era. And if that's the case, then the question becomes simple. Does this turn into a focused project, or does it turn into a scattered attempt to pull everyone into one narrative at the same time? But here's the tension behind it, because if Drake is really trying to operate at that level, then he can't do it alone. He would need allies, features, and carefully chosen connections to make any of it land the way he wants. And that's exactly why every rumored interaction starts to matter more than it normally would. It's not just about making songs anymore. It's about who is willing to stand next to him when the narrative gets loud. And when people start refusing those collaborations, it changes the whole energy of the rollout. Now, zooming out, there's another layer building underneath all of this, the Kendrick Lamar side of the equation. Because while all of this Drake speculation is growing louder, there's also constant chatter about Kendrick's next move. And you won't believe how much that shifts the conversation. Ever since those leaked snippets and rumored materials started circulating, the industry has been acting like something is already in motion behind the scenes. Whether it's a feature first or a full album rollout, the expectation is clearly there. And according to multiple sources being repeated across the space, Kendrick's next appearance might even come before a full project drops, possibly through a feature or a surprise release window. That alone changes the timeline everyone is trying to predict, because if Kendrick re-enters the conversation while all this Drake momentum is building, then the two narratives don't just coexist, they collide. And here's the part that really shapes the debate. Some people believe Drake's current approach, flooding the space with music, visibility, and constant output, is designed to counter that exact moment, a surprise response strategy meant to stay ahead of Kendrick's next move. But history tells a different story. Whenever both artists have been active in the same window, the impact doesn't feel balanced. It feels like one moment overshadows the other. And that's why this whole situation feels so one-sided in perception right now. Because while Drake's output is loud, constant, Kendrick's presence carries a different kind of weight, less frequent, more unpredictable, and harder to prepare for. So if Drake's plan is to overwhelm the cycle, the risk is that it ends up amplifying the very thing he's trying to compete with. At the end of the day, that's the real tension here, not just who drops music, but who controls attention when both worlds finally collide again. If you strip away the noise, what this really comes down to is a question of intent versus impact. Because sure, Drake can keep flooding the market with new music, and on paper that looks like control, momentum, even dominance. But the real question you won't believe people keep ignoring is whether that strategy actually holds up when the competition isn't ordinary. It's Kendrick Lamar, Jay-Z, and artists whose work isn't judged by quantity, but by cultural weight and longevity. And that's where the entire drop more music idea starts to get complicated. Because if this is really a reaction strategy, something built around urgency, competition, or even spite, then it assumes that attention alone decides the outcome. But in hip-hop, that's never been the full equation. You can dominate timelines, algorithms, and streaming cycles, but you can't manufacture the kind of impact that rewrites conversations for years. And that's the gap people keep pointing to when they compare these approaches. Now, to be fair, there's another angle here too. Because if Drake is genuinely preparing for something like Scary Hours 4, then it might not just be about volume. It could be about sharpening a specific message, a return to direct, focused, confrontational energy. But even then, the challenge doesn't change. The moment you frame your output around response, you give control of the narrative to whoever triggered it. And that's a risky position when you're dealing with artists who don't play the same frequency game in the first place. And when you bring Kendrick into that equation, the contrast becomes even more obvious. Kendrick doesn't need constant output to dominate conversation. He needs moments, and those moments tend to reset the entire industry mood whenever they land. That's why people keep saying the same thing in different ways. It's not about how many songs are dropped. It's about what those songs do when they arrive. So at the end of all this speculation, the real tension isn't who's dropping next, it's who controls the moment when they do. Because if both of them are active again in the same window, this isn't just another rollout cycle. It becomes a direct comparison of influence, legacy, and how each artist defines relevance in real time. And that's the part nobody can fully predict yet.